Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is Jim McKelvey. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick.
Good to have you on. Really appreciate you taking the time. I think a lot of our guests probably know you from Square and from the Innovation Stack book that you've written recently. But if for those that might not know all of that, tell us a little bit more about your background. And I would love to know what led you to write that book in the first place.
So my background's pretty weird. I'm an engineer by training. I've got another degree in economics, and I was a professional glassblower for many years. Still do it as a hobby, but I used to make a living selling stuff that nobody needs. That's kind of how Square started. I was trying to sell some things that I couldn't, and lost a sale because I couldn't take an American Express card. So that's what sort of led me to start Square. And, I started Square with Jack Dorsey. Jack actually used to work with me at another company that I have. And so, he had just been kicked out of Twitter for the first time. So that was, a fortuitous timing. But the funny thing is, and this is why I wrote the book, Square got attacked by Amazon when we were still a startup. And when Amazon does that to a startup, the startup dies. Like that is just always the case.
Sure.
And for some reason, Square survived. Like this was one of those things that I was happy it happened, but I couldn't explain why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, when Amazon decides to add their brand, undercut your price by 30%, you're just dead.
You're done.
Plus, they have all these relationships. I mean, it's just they're an impossible company to fend off. And yet Square did so. And so the question is, how'd that happen and why? Like, why weren't we just roadkill? And the answer was very interesting because in order to answer the question, I had to find other examples of companies that had been in similar situations. And it was very hard to find these at first, but then I started looking backwards in history through, centuries of research, and it was this interesting pattern where these companies were doing something that was so radically different from what the convention was that when competitors tried to copy them, they always failed. And I saw this pattern again and again, and I was like, oh my God, that's the answer. And so being almost satisfied with that, I had one question that was still nagging at me, which was just, selection bias, which is like if you do historical research, a lot of times you can delude yourself into thinking what you are doing is good research, but what you're really doing is just picking, you're cherry picking the facts that support your thesis and you're ignoring everything else.
Yep.
So in order to fight this, I needed to speak to somebody who was still alive. And the only founder of one of these companies that I could still find who was living was Herb Kelleher. And he was the founder of Southwest Airlines. And so I went down and I spent an afternoon. Herb was very generous with his time. He talked to me about, the book and how we were going to do it. I'm sorry, about my research. There was no book at the time. We just talked about my research. And towards the end of our talk, he started getting very excited. And he said, how are you going to share this with the world? Like, what's your plan to get this information out? And I was like, well, I don't really have a plan. I wasn't planning to do that. Like, this was just sort of for me. And, he looked at me kind of sternly and he's like, you really ought to share this because I've never heard it expressed this way before. And, when somebody like Herb Kelleher gives you a homework assignment, you say, yes, sir. So I said, yes, sir, and spent the next 2.5 years writing a book. Or I should say rewriting a book. The book it went through 8 rewrites before I thought it was readable. But
Gotcha.
That's what became the Innovation Stack.
Okay. So was your intention, and even when you met with Herb, to just for your own purposes, or where did you think you were going with this?
Well, I'm just sort of obsessive by nature and I wanted an answer. And plus meeting with Herb Kelleher is really cool. Like there occasionally people, I get to meet with people who are just super cool and I don't really have I was like, wow, I can't even believe I could be in a room with Herb, but to spend an afternoon with him, like, why would you say no to that?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have this idea of a book because I'd already written other books. I published 3 textbooks. I mean, 2 on computer programming and 1 on glass blowing. So like seeing my name on the spine of a book, it's less thrilling the fourth time.
Fair enough.
But in this situation, the book was the appropriate way to convey the information because it was sort of a new thought. Like I've read a lot of business books, and nobody ever explained it. Nobody ever explained this phenomenon that I was trying to, sort of grapple with. So it was, I thought it was important, even though it was excruciating to do the writing.
So what was the evolution then from this interview and the homework assignment that you got towards then writing out the rest of the book and probably the remaining research that you needed to do, right?
Yeah. So at first I tried to, just use my wallet and hire a ghostwriter or three. I hired 3 separate ghostwriters to try to write the stuff down. I would give them notes. And the writing was just terrible. It read like every other business book, which if you've read business books, it's just repulsive. I mean, it's just boring. It's like dry and terrible. So I was like, if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to publish. So then I went this whole other direction. I thought, okay, instead of writing a book, I'm going to do a graphic novel, right? So I recast the entire story as a cartoon. And I worked on that for about a year. And I got to Herb's chapter. And then I called Herb to, tell him the idea. And he hated it. He was like, I do not want to be I don't want to have any part of this if you're going to do it so, frivolously. And I was like, no, like graphic novel. It's a new form of literature. But he wasn't having it anyway. He saw it as a comic book. He thought it was stupid. And he told me, if you're going to do it that way, leave me out. And I wasn't going to leave Herb out, and I wasn't going to disrespect the man. So I then went back to writing, but this time I just wrote every word myself. And I rewrote until it was something that I would want to read, and so that's when I finally published. Was when I had something that I was like, okay, if somebody sat me down and I had to read the first 2 pages, would I finish the book? And so, at least for me, I think I got there.
I'm curious, for someone like you, you've got a lot of different endeavors going on all concurrently. Sometimes even for me, writing can be both lethargic as well as painful sometimes, right? It's just hard to get yourself going. Did this book come easily for you?
No, it was brutal. It was brutal. I went through a bunch of denial. I tried to buy my way out of it. I tried to, joke my way out of it. I finally had to write my way out of it. And the only way I could do it, I have a speaker's agent, and he's this real shark of a guy. And I just called him up one day and I said, book me in Australia. Go send me to the Middle East for 24 hours. Like send me on these impossibly long airplane rides. I mean, imagine this. You get on the plane to go to Australia, right? So I live in St. Louis. That means a connection. I say I go to New York or California or something. And then it's like a 14-hour trip. You land in Australia, you're there for a day and a half, but you're totally jet lagged. So you're awake all night. I had these periods where I was like on a plane and I had to write, or I was awake in the hotel and I had to write. Like I was just forcing myself into situations where I had no family around. I had no distractions. I had my headset on and I was just jamming out in words.
No good excuses. Yep.
Yeah. Remove the excuses.
So that worked pretty well.
Instead of self-discipline, which I have basically very little of.
I'm telling you, sometimes those business trips, when you're just captive on a plane, that's when I get the most work done, right? You're like, there's no good reason not to get through this right now.
Yeah. I mean, you have no excuse, especially since that's the reason I took the gig,
Right. Well, talk to us a little bit about what message you're trying to get across in the book. There's a lot of great lessons in the individual chapters. And you talk about, the theme is innovation stack and taking what seems like a very big problem and making into much smaller ones. I think you talked about, instead of viewing it as the mighty dragon, the 10,000 rats, right? Is that what you're trying to convey? Is that the takeaway for readers?
Yeah, I always misinterpreted what innovation was. So I was taught that innovation was this sort of flash of insight or some sort of brilliance that led to, this single invention. The pattern that I found was quite different. And that is, and there are kind of 2 components to it. The first is you need to sort of divide the world into 2 sections. And one is the stuff we know how to do and stuff we don't know how to do, right? And so most of the problems and most of your life will be spent in this world of stuff we know how to do. You're just going to live there. Like tonight, you're going to have dinner. And like my hope is that what you eat for dinner tonight is not experimental. Like I'm going home, my wife's cooking tonight. And she said, "Oh, Jim, I was walking through the park and I found this bush and I decided to, chop it up and serve it to the family tonight. I hope it's not poisonous. Maybe it'll actually be good." Right. That's not the experience that I want. Like I want dinner to be this solved problem, and we spend most of our life in that world of solved problems. But there's this other world, and the other world is stuff that we don't know how to do yet. And if you step into that world, then you're forced, and I use the word forced, to invent something new. And we just don't have tools for that. Like if you spend all your life copying and all of your schooling and all of your socialization and basically all the stuff that makes you is a copy of somebody else's formula, which is how it should be. When we finally get into the world where we don't have anything to copy, we are deeply troubled. And that's the situation that I found was the common denominator of all the companies that I studied, which was for one reason or another, they couldn't copy. So they had to invent. And this is the second thing, that the process of invention is fundamentally different from copying. Like it is this thing that like and this is sort of interesting, when I went to write the book, I couldn't even find a word in the English language to describe the sort of business activities that these companies were doing. Like the stuff that they were doing, there was no word for it. So it was telling to me. It was like, oh, this is something that's discussed so infrequently that we don't even have vocabulary. So I had to go and I had to basically find old words and redefine it. It was probably the worst part of the book is where I start having to say, okay, I need this word and here's how I'm going to use it. And now just bear with me for 200 pages because this is how I'm going to use this word. Otherwise it'll be terrible. But innovation is not one great idea. The innovations that are significant are a series of little inventions that collectively form this new thing. And I actually use the word innovation as a collective in the book. So if I use the word innovation, I don't say an innovation. I say innovation, like you wouldn't say I have a concrete. Mm-hmm. No, I use concrete. Concrete is this thing that it's a collective. So and I really believe that about the significant innovations are not singular things. They are collectives.
Does that also mean they're ever evolving, right? Because they're adapting new markets, new ideas, and being added onto?
Yeah, a little bit, but once they start evolving, they come back into the world that we're familiar with, which is sort of the refinement of everything, right? Mm-hmm. So I've got a generation 12 phone here. Is this significantly different from generation 11?
Right.
No. It's now, was the first phone, was the first smartphone pretty interesting? Yeah. Actually it was. Mm-hmm. And it took a tremendous amount of work to get that first sort of idea out. And that's what Steve Jobs and the team at Apple did. And I guess to a lesser extent, the guys at, RIM and BlackBerry. But, once the product is created, then it kind of comes back into this world where we refine it like all things.
You were saying a second ago, look at some of these successful businesses or startups or ideas, and a lot of times we see the end result, right? And it looks like it was this moment of genius that just happened at one time, and that end state was created or at least envisioned, right? But I think what you're saying is we might be looking at that end state, but there was a lot of steps that got you between A and B, right? Is that kind of a different way to say it?
Yes, and that innovation stacks are like icebergs. They're 10% visible, which makes them very hard to copy. So if you think about the Amazon situation, Amazon was copying Square, and at the time, I counted 14 things that we were doing for the first time ever in the finance world. like 14 things that had never been done before.
Okay.
Not 3, it wasn't just that little white reader that we plugged in, but 14 unique activities, and not all of those were visible. And so when Amazon copied what we were doing, they're a very smart company, very competent people, but they didn't see the other stuff that we were doing. They didn't know why we were doing it. And because they were taking a copying mentality, basically they took Square and they said, okay, we want to do what they're doing. And they put a team on it, and the team copied what they could see, but they couldn't copy what they couldn't see. Mm-hmm. And since they weren't actually forced to invent themselves, they screwed a lot of it up. And those missing inventions eventually drove them to relinquish the business. So like Amazon fought Square for about a year, and then they quit. As a matter of fact, the way they quit was pretty cool. They mailed one of our little Square readers to all their soon-to-be former customers, basically saying, we're out, use Square.
Yeah.
But that was not a unique case. Like the same thing happened with Southwest, the same thing happened with IKEA. I believe the same thing's going to happen a lot with Tesla and electric cars, although there's more diffusion of knowledge in the auto industry now. But there's just a ton of really protective elements if you have an innovation stack.
Yeah. Well, I want to go into those 14 things a little bit. I've been in payments for almost 20 years. And, from the very beginning, what I was always taught was, hey, there's all of these rules and they must be followed. Yes. And being a bit of a rule follower myself, we tended to follow the rules. But, from listening to some of the stories you tell in the book, you guys went head first into things that, were kind of frowned upon or explicitly prohibited.
Yes.
And so... Yeah. What made you guys even want to take on that many problems head first? Or did you not even know they existed and still you started getting into it?
We didn't know.
Okay.
It was ignorance. It wasn't this sort of hubris, like we'll change the world. There was none of that. It was sort of like, we want to build this thing that's simple, and we just couldn't imagine that it wasn't possible or legal. Yeah. And when we found out it wasn't possible or legal in the existing rule structure, we just kept going. Like we built it anyway. And then we went around either becoming compliant with the rules, or in some cases having the rules changed. And there were several rules that actually had to be changed in order for Square to exist.
Yeah. Do you think if you knew there were going to be that many hurdles to jump over at the very beginning, you would have wanted to take on that kind of challenge?
I don't think so. But back then I didn't know what I know now. Like I didn't have the knowledge that researching and writing this book has given me. If I knew it today, like if I'd read the book today and knew there was this idea of innovation that was different that I'd always held, then I would have been totally excited. Because if you see yourself at like a normal business as a commodity, which is to say, you're going to make some money, you're going to be successful, but you're not going to have the whole field to yourself. Like you will be quickly swarmed by competitors. And they will, work down to some equilibrium. Well, you'll still make money, but you better not, let your guard down. If you have an innovation stack and you apply the learnings correctly, you can literally own a market for centuries. Like you can own a market effectively forever. I'm looking what IKEA is doing in the furniture world, and they're just unassailable. And these companies that have these advantages can literally lock these markets down for at least decades. So if I knew then what I know now, yes, I would have. But at the time, if you'd told me that it would take me a year and a half to get like just the first product out, I probably would have said, oh, well, let's do something easier.
Yeah. Well, at Square, you guys were trying to solve a fairly novel problem, right? Well, the problem was known. You had a lot of small merchants that couldn't accept credit cards, but maybe they wanted to, maybe they didn't, but that opportunity existed, right? So there was definitely this kind of untapped market for what you guys were trying to solve for. But there's other startups that are trying to take a kind of an existing problem that maybe even has a solution, but do it better. So how when you're thinking about it in terms of the innovation stack, how novel do you think the idea needs to be?
I think it's a question of the problem. So first of all, let me sort of argue with something you said, which is that we knew that there was a market for what we were building. We absolutely didn't. We were building for a class of merchants that we were told didn't want our products. Like all the experts in the banking industry basically said, oh, well, the reason we don't allow small merchants to process credit cards is, they don't want to, or they're bad credit risks, or it can't be done. Interestingly, Herb Kelleher told me a story when he started Southwest Airlines that the government, the US government did a study of air travel, and they concluded that the only people who wanted to fly were business executives or rich people. And this was a government study, and the government basically surveyed all airplane travelers, and they found that the people were either very wealthy or were rich, or were, having somebody else pay the bill. Right. And they concluded that therefore the only people who wanted air travel were rich folks and businessmen. And Herb looked at this and he thought, this is idiotic. Of course, normal people would want to travel if we can make it affordable, but the study said otherwise. Likewise with Square, we started building something just for me. Like I was the guy who lost a sale and needed, to get paid. I didn't know if there were more people like me out there. Like I've got a bunch of weird tastes, and a lot of times I think, well, everyone will want this, and no, nobody does. Like right now, I'm building a personal paywall for my email. Like if you want to email me, it's going to cost you a nickel. I love this thing. Like it's made me like $2 when I was testing it, but it also cut my spam to like 0. It's fantastic. It's a personal paywall. Cost you a nickel.
You gotta really want to send it then, right? I like this idea.
I mean, but does the world want that? I don't know. I mean, if Google gives me permission, I'm going to release it to the public. But there's a lot of unknown if you're starting an innovative company, because you're building something that by definition doesn't exist, and therefore you can't prove that there's a market for it. So that's sort of the big disagreement that I have with your previous statement. But look, generally, our ignorance about the financial world was our great strength, because we did not know, and therefore we sort of trudged forth blindly.
Yeah. So starting to just solve your problem, and then trudging along, and you're jumping over all of these hurdles, you guys get to launch, and then you start getting to market. Like, how did you get to, hey, small merchants, here's the solution? I mean, you talk in the book a little bit about designing this elegant solution that people just wanted to use and play with and plug into their phone. Do you think that was really the impetus that caused it to grow and really catch fire?
It was certainly part of it. I mean, because we had no marketing budgets, we had no sales effort, and so our product had to literally sell itself. And one of the things that helps is if your product is super simple. So if people can understand at a very basic level what you do and why, then hopefully they'll like it and explain it to others. And so for almost 2.5 years, we had a company that doubled its size every 2 months with no advertising. So that was just word of mouth. That was just demand. That was just people saying, oh, use Square. Oh, use Square. Oh, you got to get Square. Like I remember the first time I thought the company was going to be successful, I was in New Orleans in the taxi, and the taxi driver was bragging to me that he could take a credit card. And he was like, if you want to pay with a credit card, you can give me a credit card, and you can give me a tip on this credit card too. And he's like, and he was pitching me my own product. Like Square was just right out of the gate. And it was weird because, like, there's that sort of period of time where you can fess up. And after that, you better like keep the lie going. And I missed that window, and I didn't fess up to who I was. So I just thought, oh, tell me more. Oh, what about this? Oh, that doesn't sound safe. I was like, and he gave me a rather inaccurate but very enthusiastic explanation of what my product did. And I was in the car with my wife, and I was like, this is going to work. Like, this is going to work. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. One of those things that really just started selling itself, huh? I mean, if you got somebody that's that enthusiastic about your product, well, that's spreading by word of mouth.
Yeah. And it had to be simple. Like it just, we couldn't make it complicated or people would get,
Yeah.
confused.
Well, and it needed to work too, right? And because it was simple, and in most situations it worked, but there was certainly some of those early adopters that had trouble with it. And how did you guys overcome that, or kind of deal with some of those people who were, I guess, detractors from it?
We had very limited customer service. We built a system that was really easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
That had no contracts, so you could leave at any time.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't keep anybody's money. We didn't have any punitive charges. We didn't have any penalties. Like, we'd send you your money the next day, so nobody ever argued about money.
Yeah.
The only people who argued with us were either people who were, just sort of belligerent and we didn't want them, or they were fraudsters and they were trying to scam us, so we didn't want to talk to them either. So we didn't even have a phone line.
Yeah.
Like, for the first 2 years of the company, we had no phone tech support. Like, if you wanted to use Square, we made it super simple and super fair, but we didn't talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you got pissed off, well, take your money and go. Like, we're not doing anything shady. And occasionally we get a situation where somebody really had a problem, and in those cases they'd email us and we deal with it. But it wasn't like we weren't going to get into the talks. Nowadays we have lots of customer service, but the old days,
yeah. So when you guys were launching it, where did the concept of payment facilitator model come from? Did you guys develop that, or was that just what it eventually became?
We invented that, basically. Although I should say PayPal really sort of pioneered it. They did it for card not present transactions. We did it for card present. And then once we'd done it, 20 companies copied us. So that's we were the first PayFac, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say that's becoming the prevailing model, right? The old ISO agent model is kind of losing some steam here in favor of one where you can onboard merchants a hell of a lot faster with a lot less paperwork and get them approved and get them up and running, which was kind of the model for you guys from the beginning, right? Make it fast, make it simple.
Yes. I mean, in these days, if you don't do it fast and simple, they just point to Square and say, well, I'll just use Square.
Right.
Block.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, one of the things that you were concerned about, or at least a lot of people told you was going to be a problem, was fraud, right? That you would have people that were using that reader for fraudulent purposes. Was that a significant problem that you had to deal with?
So not to put your audience to sleep here, but there's a lot of different types of fraud. The fraud where you're out as a merchant selling stuff you shouldn't be selling, like drugs. I guess these days it's legal to sell some of them, but there's some others that you can't. That's a transaction that we're supposed to catch, and the banks want us to, stop those transactions. We do, as good a job as we can. And then there's another type of fraud, which is, the merchant faking transactions and then trying to steal our money. And that was significant. And that was one of the things we had to learn how to fight. And that, the big early battle at the company was to, get the fraudsters in check. And that's where, again, I thought that fraud was going to be like, as I said in the book, I thought it was going to be a mighty dragon. It was 10,000 rats. Like, it was just these little, just guys trying to scam you. And there are millions of them. As a matter of fact, I've got a video on YouTube that is a complete hour-long tutorial on how to scam Square. And you can listen to it yourself, but you have to speak Chinese because it's in Chinese.
Gotcha. I'm curious, does that video have a lot of listens or views?
I could look. Let me see how many.
No, I was just curious.
Right.
If a lot of people were trying to look for ways to scam Stripe, or
I'm sure it had hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to ask you at least a little bit about Invisibly and kind of what you guys are doing there, because this idea of people's data and information being valuable and giving them some control over how to monetize it or at least profit from it, certainly a topic, and it seems like this is what you guys are trying to do. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Invisibly is really simple. I got sick of losing control of my eyeballs, right? So what would happen, I read a lot, and I would often hit paywalls on articles that I want to read, or I'd reading some breaking news story and I can't get the thing because I don't subscribe to this, or just a pain in the ass. Or when I did get a news story, it was just like festooned with ads and this thing, that, So,
Right.
so we thought about a system. It's a very simple idea, which is that, look, nothing's free, right? Like if you don't pay money to a publisher, you are paying with attention. So you're paying by watching ads. That's how your TV works. That's how YouTube works. That's how, all this stuff works. If you're not paying money, you're paying with your attention. And so we thought, well, what if and by the way, the middlemen make all the money in that situation. If I'm paying through one of these platforms, 80 to 90% of the money is sucked up between my attention and the content creator. Like that, there is a 80% at minimum loss, which is to say that most of my money is not paying for the thing that I want. It's paying this chain in the center. And we thought, well, what if we break the chain? So what if we put the person, you, in charge of what data you're going to sell? You tell us, will you tell us, where you live? Will you tell us, what bank accounts you use? Will you tell us your sexual preferences? Like, will tell us your age? Will you tell us your medical? Like, you tell us what we can sell. I don't care what it is. There's a market for all this stuff. You tell us what we can sell. We're then going to go out and sell it, make a bunch of money. And we're not going to keep more than 15% of that money. We're going to give 85% of that balance to you. And then you say, well, what can I spend my money on? And the answer is all the stuff you want to read, like everything. Wall Street Journal, Barron's, Atlantic, UPI. Like we've got all these content creators that would normally be behind paywalls. Mm-hmm. So you either have to have like dozens of subscriptions, which is a pain in the ass and kind of expensive, or you can just use Invisibly and get what you want whenever you want, and we'll just pay on your behalf, selling your eyeballs as we go, to pay your balance. Now, there are two sort of magical things about Invisibly. One is you just get access, and you don't even realize how much hassle you're saving. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, and this is, I think, really important, most of your money goes to the publishers. You are paying way more to the actual creator if you read through Invisibly than if you access that same content through some other means. And in most cases, these are behind paywalls, so there is no other means to access it. But occasionally an article, slips through Google or something. But even in that situation, you're paying more to the publisher, and this is good. And people are like, no, I want everything to be free. It's like, no, you don't. Like, free sucks. Like, if you look at what actually free content is, like, do you drive the cheapest car you possibly can find? Like, do you have the cheapest clothes? Like, do you always want free? Like, there's free food available. I can go to a food bank, if I'm willing to stand in line. Like, that's free. Like,
there's no reason.
You want, as somebody who enjoys reading, to pay more for the stuff you enjoy. You actually want to pay, like if Barron's comes out with some great article and you can pay Barron's 10 times as much as they normally make for that article, you're basically voting for the whole system that brought you that article. And that's how the economy works. So it's this really powerful idea. Is it going to work? I don't know. I mean, we've just got our alpha product out now. You can go to invisibly.com and start playing with it. It's pretty cool. It's got some sharp edges, but like right now I use it frankly every day because now I don't have 12 subscriptions to stuff that I occasionally read. And I've got access. So that's pretty cool. And then for the stuff that I would subscribe to anyway, it's just a much more easy format to consume it in because I don't have to remember the subscriptions and the passwords and the paywalls and all that stuff just goes away.
Sure. So the personal information that you're giving, which is kind of building up a bank account a little bit, that then you're redeeming through purchasing these articles, right? Is that information going to the publishers or just others that may want that data?
No, the publishers don't want it. We're selling it to advertisers and marketers, and like you're still gonna get some sort of solicitation. I don't want you to think that like there's no selling of your eyeballs in Invisibly unless you don't want to. So like actually one of the coolest things about Invisibly is you can turn the whole thing off and just say, look, this is so cheap. I'll give you my credit card, charge me 4 cents an article and never bother me again. Like we can like totally disappear. So that's an option. But like a lot of people just on principle say, I never pay for my news. Okay, fine, dude. Let's play that game. Don't pay. But now, how do you want to not pay? Do you want to not pay by watching this ad? Do you want to not pay by taking this item, taking a test drive? Like I can get you $50 for test driving a car, Now I'm not going to turn around and hand you the 50. I'm going to keep that 50 on your behalf and make you spend it on content, because we actually launched an early version of the product where we would sort of directly pay out what people could earn by selling their advertising attention. That was a disaster because all the fraudsters showed up, like all the scumbags who were faking their identities just so they could get, $5 here, $10 there. Just disaster. But you want to fake me out now? Great. Read The Economist cover to cover.
This is interesting because it's somewhat the anti-subscription model in favor of one that is more usage-based, right? Like just paying for the premium content that I want to, albeit in smaller increments. Do you see this going beyond print articles, maybe into streaming movies or TV shows or other content that can be delivered digitally? Yeah,
we think it can be. We think it could be extended, but frankly, we're actually doing a lot for subscriptions. It turns out that the publisher just wants to get paid, so they've got subscriptions. So in a lot of cases, what we do is we just buy a subscription on your behalf. We don't tell you we're buying the whole subscription. We just pay for the subscription. And then we charge you these little payments. We chop it up into little payments until you've covered your subscription. And it's like, I'm not trying to be sneaky about this. It's just like people don't care. Like we're talking about 2 cents here, 4 cents there, a quarter cent here. Nobody cares. Like at the amounts of money that we're talking about, it's so trivial that this is why we call the company Invisibly, is that it's really something that should happen invisibly. It should happen like we'll show if you care, but you really don't. So actually publishers love it because we're actually upping their subscriptions, although in a technical sense, the subscription is coming through an Invisibly reader as opposed to through a direct subscription. But like they're getting the money and they're getting the info and the people are reading their stuff and their brand's not obfuscated and it's a great experience. So they kind of like it. Well, yeah, and I got to believe if they're consistently going to that Barron's article or the Wall Street Journal or whatever and finding that, hey, I'm going to their articles a lot, I really like this content, that may cause them to go eventually directly and get a subscription to that service, right? We think it might, but again, it's so easy to access it through Invisibly that maybe they'll just stick with us. But either way, we're happy because ultimately, what we want to do is just sort of shine some light in a dark corner, which is the way stuff's monetized on the web is usually against the interest of the person who is being monetized. Like if I'm selling your eyeballs, I'm probably not doing so as your fiduciary. I'm probably doing so as somebody who's trying to exploit your behavior. And that leads to a lot of bad stuff. Like one of the things that we've seen, and I think the world is waking up to this, is that what you think of as the news is not an unbiased selection of articles. It's actually a AI curated list of articles that's designed to keep you engaged. And what engaged means, engaged and enraged are very similar terms in the news world. And what they'll do is they'll say, okay, Nick normally reads about 5 or 6 articles. Okay, we're gonna let him read his 4th article. And after his 4th article, the 5th article that we recommend is really gonna piss him off. Like we're gonna look all through everything that's happening right now, and we're gonna find the most likely inflammatory article to get this guy pissed off. And then he's going to stay for 7 or 8, right? Because they make money the longer you stay on.
Mhm.
And that's their algorithm. That's how that algorithm works, because it's designed to optimize your engagement, and your engagement is tied to your enragement. And so one of the reasons you find yourself angry when you read the news, or one of the files like, if you find yourself like pissed off after an online session, it's not necessarily an accident.
Right.
So the question is that good for you? Like, is it good to be pissed off and have all that cortisol like flowing through your veins? I don't think so. Like, I think you kind of want to have control, and Invisibly gives you that.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, anger is a very strong emotion. It's a very engaging emotion, and that's what keeps you on these sites, right? And reading the next article.
It does, but it's just not good for you.
No, no. But being more conscious of it, and at least choosing your journey more than you perhaps are now, when these algorithms are telling you what the next article is to look at, is got to be better for us.
I hope that putting the user in control is good. I mean, that's what our premise is. We're putting you in the center of control of your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jim, I really appreciate the time today. This has been a fun conversation, and hearing about your background and some of your experiences along the way. The book is available everywhere, I believe, right? But if they want to go check it out, what are the best places to go?
Well, ironically, they can buy it on Amazon. Well,
they sent you so much business, you should send some back to them.
Yeah, I can't hate on Amazon. I'd rather see you buy it from a local bookstore, but actually most people get the audiobook. The audiobook's been pretty popular. But I have to say, even if you don't read the book, somebody who probably would benefit from it. Here's how you find the person to read the book. Reading my book will not teach you anything about, there's no checklist, there's no like formula for making the next square, any of that crap. The only thing you will learn is that innovation is this thing that is so rare that when it really happens, you will probably be scared. And the reason I wrote the book is because if I can reach 100,000 or 1 million people with this idea that most of your life you're going to spend safely over here in this world where we know how everything works, but occasionally you'll be on the other side of the line. And when that happens, I want you to at least know what it's like to work in that world, and that it's not all terror. Like, it's not all bad. Like, because believe me, if you do something for the first time, and I mean the first time in human history, all your friends, all your family, all your education, all your DNA, like everything that you've been used to listening to will tell you, come back, don't step over here. And yet that's where progress is made. And so that's why I want people to read it, or at least digest the ideas. Steal them. I don't need the $15. I'm fine. Good without the $15. As a matter of fact, I don't even get the $15. I think that's the cover price. I probably get 50 cents. So don't worry about me. Steal it if you want, but get this idea that you don't have to spend your entire life just in copy mode.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my message. But thank you for helping me get that message out.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to do. And I can attest, it's a really good book, or in my case, I'm one of the ones who decided to listen to it. So I appreciate you putting it out there as well. But Jim, thanks so much for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. All the best. Bye-bye.